Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 626 for the 11th of October 2020. Hang on, wait a second. 626, there's a repeated number, 2 sixes. For the 11th of October, 11 is 1 and 1, 2020, 2020. Oh, the numerologists will be having a field day with that. And for those people who keep a track on these sort of things, it's a bright sunny day here in Sydney, Australia. And I think it's going to get quite warm. 26 degrees later on this afternoon, I saw in the forecast. Coming up on this week's show, part 2 of the interview with Brian Deer, conducted by Heidi Robinson, the Raw Skeptic. Part 1 last week was very, very interesting, and we got a lot of good comments back from that. And this week in part 2, Brian Deer tells Heidi Robinson why Andrew Wakefield was let go from the Royal Free Hospital, some of his conflicts of interests, and buying blood from children. And if that were not enough, you'll hear about some of Brian Deer's other investigations. And just to remind you, this is all about the book outlining the activities of Andrew Wakefield, the then doctor who stirred up the MMR autism so-called debate and controversy. Following that, it's the latest news from the Australian Skeptics, see what has caught the eye of Tim Mendham, and then Tim Mendham appears in person, so to speak, with the Book of Tim. This week, a review of a Flat Earth website. Then to round off the show, it's another in our continuing series of diving through the archive at Trove, the National Library of Australia. And this week we look for the term quackery in the decades and decades and decades of digitized newspapers and so on. Now, normally I've recorded the show hours before this, but you know what? This morning I had a leisurely lie-in, and why not? Every now and then it's a good thing to do. I hope no matter where you are listening around the world that you too, at least occasionally, can have a nice leisurely lie-in. But now it's time for me to run downstairs. Where's that coffee? I think there's a little bit of coffee left in the pot. Yes, I'll drain that coffee, have some Vegemite toast. Good old standby. And while I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. It's the Raw Skeptic Report with Heidi Robinson.
Hello everyone. Today I present part 2 of my 3-part interview with Brian Deer, the man who wrote the book The Doctor Who Fooled the World, about Mr. Andrew Wakefield and the so-called link between vaccinations and autism. Today, Brian tells us of why Wakefield left the Royal Free Hospital, conflicts of interest, buying blood from children, and some of his other investigations. Mr. Brian Deer, welcome to the Skeptic Zone.
Hello, Heidi. Good to be here.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about, something that I wasn't aware of a lot of the things in the book before I read it, but one of the things that I thought was quite telling was the reason that Wakefield left the Royal Free Hospital where the children had been studied. Could you run us through the reason why he left the hospital?
Yes, he goes around telling everybody that he was persecuted by the medical establishment and by me and the drug industry and God knows what, and that he's a victim. In fact, he was offered by University College London way back in 2000, late 2000, the closing days of the 20th century. He was offered by the medical school and by the university. And University College London is one of the most prestigious and certainly among the most scientifically capable universities in the world. He was offered the opportunity with their support to do a proper replication study with 150 children, not 12, with molecular testing and with 2 labs shadowing it. So it'd be run in parallel across 3 labs. Under his direction, this project would be, and it would answer the question definitively whether his hypothesis was borne out or not. And he initially, as the century ended, said yes, he would do it. And he'd been this deal had been hatched not by just him and his department. It was hatched by the president and provost of University College London, who wrote to him with this proposition. And Wakefield refused to do it. And he refused to do a replication study. This study has never been replicated. The findings of this paper have never been replicated anywhere in the world, although Wakefield and his people say, oh, there's 15 studies and all that kind of stuff they come up with. Never been replicated. He refused to do it. So and he said the reason he wouldn't do it was because it would infringe his academic freedom. To answer this question, when the UK at that time was absolutely galvanized. Parents were terrified about the thought of vaccinating their children. Parents with autism were blaming themselves. We were heading towards disease outbreaks. And he believed it infringed his academic freedom to carry out this project requested of him by University College London. So that it then took them, because academics do have freedom and do have tenure, it then took them 2 years to get him out. And eventually they got him out. That's basically the deal when he left his last academic post. He refused to do the work that would have answered the question that parents were asking and continue to ask to this day.
That's right. And not only giving an answer to those very desperate parents who just wanted answers, but also it would have exonerated him had he come forward and successfully replicated the findings of the first study.
Yes, he would have been vindicated.
That's
it was an
right,
offer.
Yeah.
What scientist would turn that offer down? When you think of scientists in academia who are constantly scraping around for money and scraping around to get interest in their work, and they're offered all the support of a major university to do something that would either vindicate or refute his hypothesis, and he refused to do it.
Refused to do it. The children in the study, the 12 children who were involved in the study, you go through in your book all of the battery of tests that they were subjected to, and they didn't. It doesn't sound pleasant for an adult, let alone a child who may be having some developmental problems and not really understanding what's going on. Can you tell me how he got ethics approval for the study, or in fact, did he get ethics approval for the study?
Well, he didn't get ethics approval for this study, and ultimately this went into the High Court, and the judge in the High Court hearing said that the claim in the paper that it had ethics approval because it had that statement in the paper was false and should never have been published. What they did was Wakefield had previously got some idea about a different study with a different number of children involving a different vaccine, and that was put to the ethics committee, and the ethics committee approved it. But it wasn't the study of these children. It was a study of a different vaccine, a different developmental issue, and a different number of children. And ultimately, that study was never done. So there was ethics approval for a study that was never carried out. There was no ethics approval for this paper, even though the paper itself claimed that it was approved by the ethics committee. And again, the other thing in the same statement in the paper, the money, because the money from the lawyer started to come in. First, an initial check came into the medical school, and the medical school said, what the hell, what's this check from a firm of lawyers to do research at our hospital? And the dean got very exercised over this and started making inquiries, and realized that this was ethically unacceptable to have research at his hospital being paid for by a firm of lawyers. None of this was ever disclosed, and this was now mediated in confidential correspondence within the school. What then happened was that the initial check from the lawyers was received by the medical school and then transferred to an account held by the hospital, because these are different bodies. The medical school is an education is an adjunct of the UK Department of Education, and then the hospital, which comes under the Department of Health. The money was transferred from the medical school to the hospitals and a fund that was run as a charity entity by the hospital, received by that charity entity, and then paid back to Wakefield's work in the medical school, and then not declared in the paper. So the hospital fund, it was called the Special Trustees Fund. The hospital fund was acknowledged in the paper as a source of funding, but the money that went into that fund that then came back to Wakefield for his work in the medical school was never acknowledged.
Yeah, I see.
Absolutely extraordinary.
I've actually made a note here in the notes I prepared for this interview. If I could just read it out directly from the book. And this is a quote from the main lawyer who was dealing with Wakefield, who was involved, Richard Barr. And just read out a quote directly from the book. Quote, "I have mentioned to you before that the prime objective is to produce unassailable evidence in court so as to convince a court that these vaccines are dangerous," end quote, the lawyer reminded the doctor in a confidential letter 6 months before the Lancet report. Now, if that's not damning evidence, I don't know what is. What does Wakefield say to all of these findings that yourself, the GMC, found as well? What does he say to all these findings? Does he just flat out deny them, or what's the justification?
He says it's all lies. He says that the story I've told over all these years and is lies. He says he never had a patent. He never had this secret deal with the lawyers. He claims that his work for the lawyers only began after the children had been seen at the hospital. He denies absolutely everything. The only thing that he's ever acknowledged is that a videotape which I obtained, in which he's telling parents at a parents' meeting in Sacramento, California, and they're all laughing about this. He tells them that he'd bought blood. You have to get, I find it hard even thinking about it now, that he bought blood from children at a birthday party given for his son. Some of them, these children as young as 4 years old, who he said cried, fainted, and vomited at this birthday party, where of which he acknowledges that he is that man. He says that he never bought that there was no purchase of the blood. The children were given the £5 afterwards, so it's ethically different from buying it from them, and that nobody fainted, nobody cried, nobody vomited. But he does admit that he is the man in that videotape. All the rest of it he denies. He says that I'm working for the pharmaceutical industry. He says that I'm a tool of Rupert Murdoch. He says that I am a psychopath and a sociopath and an incorrigible liar. It's all a complete fabrication. And he says that the other thing he tries to do is to suggest that all this is just from me, and he conveniently leaves out a 217-day hearing by the General Medical Council where there was a 5-member panel who went into this, the fact that all the allegations were put to him beforehand, that he had the criminal standard of sureness in those hearings, that his own counsel said that one of the charges that was ultimately on his own counsel on his behalf, who acknowledged that one of the charges found proven against him was of fraud. There were 4 counts of dishonesty in this research found proven against him. We've got parents of the children involved in the research who come forward and say this is fraudulent, this is a complete fabrication. The British Medical Journal looked into all this and described it as an elaborate fraud. He says this is all lies. He did nothing wrong. This is all made up by me.
Yeah. And if I could just go off on a bit of a tangent here, because your history as an investigative journalist, you've had a special interest during your career investigating fraud and dishonesty and shoddy research practices in the pharmaceutical industry. I think you said in the book you had no horse in the race, so to speak, about whether vaccines, the MMR, did in fact cause autism. Your job as a reporter was to unearth the truth and to just report on what you found. So can you just speak on that to the audience a little bit? Because I wasn't aware of all your other good work within the pharmaceutical industry, exposing the pharmaceutical industry and some of their practices. Can you just tell us briefly about some of the other cases that you've been involved with?
Yeah, I mean, I came to the Sunday Times in 1981. God Almighty, 1981. that is a long time ago. And by 1986, I mean, I'd had earlier than that, I'd had a bit of experience writing about doctors for doctor magazines and things like that, and just little profiles and bits and pieces. And I was quite interested in doctors. And I discovered that if I wrote about something, a medical investigation of some kind, it would get on the front of the paper. And if I wrote about what was my first love, really, which was social issues, I was the UK's first social affairs correspondent. So I used to do like housing, prisons, poverty, all those kind of like stories that most other journalists wouldn't get involved in. So I specialised in that. But I found that if I did medical stories, they got on the front because it was just, the Sunday Times being the newspaper that it is. In 1986 was my first story where I went all around the world. I went from London. I could have just flown directly to Geelong near Melbourne and flown back again, but I didn't. I got an arrangement whereby I went all the way around the world. But I went out and I investigated at Geelong a fraud by a man called Michael Briggs, who was a British researcher at Geelong at Deakin University, where he fabricated all his work on the it was earlier than now, but a generation of contraceptive pills, the triphasic contraceptive pills. And he fabricated a whole string of studies on that, including animal work. And when I finally got to meet him, I said, "Well, where did you do the work with beagles?" He said, "Well, at Deakin." And I said, "Well, I've been to Deakin and I would have heard them barking." No, he made them up. So that really got me interested. And that work was done for, they deny all knowledge that he was doing it, but was being done for a company which I think has now gone, Shearing AG, and taken up by Wyeth and various others. So I did that, and that really got me interested in pharmaceuticals. Series of another big one was into the what was then the Wellcome Foundation, which produced a drug which is still available called Bactrim and Septrin and Septra, still available. And I did a big investigation into that, which showed that the composition of that drug exposes patients to unnecessary risks. And that was another big page one story. And I did the dark side of Viagra. I've done a doctor who faked his work on kidney stuff. I've done Vioxx, the whole scandal over Vioxx. Yeah, I mean, I've done a whole string over the years, and I found it. I wanted, when I got involved in the whole Wakefield thing, what I'd wanted to do was an investigation of statins, because I still believe that it's something that really needs to be looked into, which is that drug, the anti-cholesterol class of drugs, which I think there are a lot of questions need answering about that. I really found interesting doing investigations into drug companies. So, yeah, I mean, I was the last person that Wakefield would want to come on his tail, because the idea that I'm working for the pharmaceutical industry is just laughable. I mean, I even chased a pharmaceutical executive with a film crew in the same way as I chased Wakefield with a film crew. And I can tell you that any pharmaceutical company or anyone working in that industry who thought they could get me on board with some kind of collaborative venture or offer me some sort of financial inducement to do their will would just assume I had a hidden camera. And I would, because it'd be a bigger story than the story they'd be offering me. I mean, yes, please. If there's any pharma executives out there who want to make improper suggestions to a journalist and involve them in some sort of collaboration to do down Andrew Wakefield or anybody else, they can contact me, and I'll be most glad to have a confidential, secret conversation with them about how we can plot that piece of journalism for.
Contact Brian here at www.
And just in case, let me just say this, because what Wakefield's people would do would be to take something where I would say what I just said to you and then publish it as if I was saying that as a confession. And so I have to now say, if you're working with the anti-vaccine groups and you want to take that as a confession from me, then, you've got worse in your head than sometimes I uncharitably and with I think an unfortunate loss of compassion sometimes. I think you need your head seeing too.
Yeah. So, exactly. The upshot of that is that you are no big pharma shill, and so to suggest that
I've never even owned a car. I can drive a car, and I've rented cars. I've never even owned a car. Imagine a pharma shill, and I live in a 1-bedroom flat, right? Yeah. So, okay, Mr. Farmer Shill, aren't I doing well? Yes, that's ironic. Don't take the quote and use it. Because they do.
Yeah. We're most of us involved with their vaccination issues and the anti-vaccination movement are very well aware of how they can cherry pick and take things completely out of context. That was part 2 of my interview with Brian Deer. Next week, in part 3, Brian talks about the impact of Wakefield's work on vaccination rates, the other authors involved in the original paper, and the link to supermodel Elle Macpherson. You can find a link to Brian's book in this week's show notes. Bye for now.
ただいま聞いていただいているポッドキャストはオーストラリアから The Skeptic Zone という科学と論理のポッドキャストです。英語は世界中で数ある言葉の一つですが、このポッドキャストはいろいろな国の言葉で紹介します。www.skepticzone.tv を調べて、ホームページの下までにスクロールすると、折り紙のピガサスという翼のある豚を工夫したリッチャード・ソーンダスのオリジナルの折り紙のポスターをダウンロードをすることができます。
Now let's take a look at the latest newsletter from the Australian Skeptics, newsletter number 108. And this arrived in my inbox on the 6th of October. And it says, "Hi all. President Trump, newly returned to the White House, declares, don't be afraid of COVID. Don't let it dominate your life. I feel better than I did 20 years ago." You can bet that will encourage the sovereign citizens / anti-COVID / bunning harassers to be out in force around the world. Just thank your lucky stars that here we have a happy newsletter covering anti-vaxxers, conspiracy theorists, UFO abductees, and satanic Ouija boards. Read on. The newsletter starts. Skepticon tickets, get them now. Only one more newsletter before Skepticon 2020 hits the digital arena. There's more information there, but a good and timely reminder that the convention is only a matter of a couple of weeks away. More news, research on anti-vaxxers. Vaccine refusers are health literate and believe they're pro-science. Study by La Trobe University researchers examined how members of the vaccine refusal movement in Australia consider themselves to be a scientific advocacy group. But the movement shows we may be placing too much faith in health literacy as a solution for health misinformation. And don't forget that all these stories have links so you can read more about that particular issue. No jab, no pay rule has little effect on anti-vaxxer parents. researchers from the National Centre for Immunisation Research and Surveillance at the University of Sydney analysed data from the Australian Immunisation Register. The findings suggest that while monetary sanctions were effective in promoting catch-up vaccinations, their impact varied with socio-economic disadvantage. Surprise, surprise, that the dyed-in-the-wool anti-vaxxers were not convinced by the no jab, no play policy. And meanwhile, the Perth venue where arch-anti-vaxxer Judy Wileman was due to speak has cancelled the event. According to the organiser, this was due to pro-vax community pressure and censorship at work by those, for example, skeptics, who regularly maligned Wileman for her work, and will no doubt continue to do so. Another story here, alternative medicine's toll on cancer patients. A study by researchers from Yale University of Medicine found that cancer patients who skipped or delayed conventional treatment to use alternative ones had as much as a 5.7-fold increased risk of dying within 5 years than those who stuck with the conventional medicine. Although the study was small and had several gaps, including not knowing the types of alternative treatments patients had tried, the researchers say they hope it spurs discussion and, quote, greater scrutiny of the use of alternative medicine for the initial treatment of cancer, end quote. Another story, relaunch of the UK Skeptic magazine. The Skeptic is the UK's longest-running publication offering skeptical analysis of pseudoscience, conspiracy theory, and claims of the paranormal. Founded in 1987, it went online only for a while and then went into hiatus for a few years. Founded in 1987, it went online only for a while and then went into hiatus a few years ago, but it has been given a new kiss of life as an online publication under the auspices of editor Michael Marshall, project director of the Good Thinking Society, along with an editorial team from the Merseyside Skeptic Society. The Skeptic is supported by the Good Thinking Society. Apart from the fact they borrowed our name, there is no relation to our local Skeptic magazine or the other one from the US, or dozens of other mags across the world with similar titles in the Vulgate. And a note here says that Marshall and fellow skeptic with the K presenter Alice Howarth are featured speakers at Skepticon 2020. Here's an interesting one. Australian UFO abduction story still stirs passion. Interesting story, especially about the demarcation disputes and one-upmanship between UFO investigation groups that still rankles almost 30 years later. Also, there are details about the current issue of our magazine, the Skeptic magazine from Australian Skeptics, The Skeptic, including a link to a sample article from the issue itself as a PDF. And don't forget, listeners, especially in Australia, if you feel you can contribute an article, a story, something like that to the magazine, the Skeptic magazine, feel free to contact editor Tim Mendham, editor at skeptics.com.au, and maybe provide an idea or an outline. Events coming up on October the 19th, Vic Skeptics Cafe, Dr. Mark Newbrook. Over in Perth on the 21st of October, Perth Skeptics in the Pub. Here in Sydney on the 5th of November, we have Sydney Skeptics in the Pub online. And there are also links to Canberra Skeptics, Gold Coast Skeptics, Queensland Skeptics, and Thinking and Drinking Adelaide Skeptics in the Pub. And the newsletter rounds off with some items of interest. Travel tip number 1, most haunted cities in America. And it lists some noted haunted spots. Travel tip number 2, most haunted places in Singapore. Probably not the country that would be on the top of your list of must-see ghost cities. It's only a small place, so there weren't too many haunted spots to choose from. Let me see, New York's most sought-after ghosts. One of the other stories here, ghost hunter horrified at Ouija boards on sale. And we only spoke about Ouija boards a week or two back on the Skeptic Zone. Paul Masters, who is a member of the True Paranormal Events UK, says that he was gobsmacked after seeing the spirit board for sale in a budget store for £1. He says that deadly demons could be released by the boards if they are in the hands of anyone but mediums, and the potential for sinister spirit activity is heightened around Halloween. We'd be gobsmacked too. £1 seems awfully cheap. Anyway, apparently a few days later, a spokesman for the shop that was selling them said that the spirit boards had vanished from stores. And there are more stories in the newsletter for you to read and enjoy, compiled by Tim Mendham. If you wish to have a look at that for yourself, if you wish to get the newsletter delivered to your inbox, simply go to www.skeptics.com.au and sign up.
Yalansavar ekibi bir grup skeptik ve bilim tutkununun bir araya gelmesiyle oluşmuş gönüllü bir ekip olup amacı toplumda eleştirel düşünce alışkanlığını yaymak ve muhtelif asılsız iddiaları irdelemektir. Bu bölümde bahsettiğimiz konulara ve farklı pek çok yazımıza yalansavar.org adresindeki web sitemizden ulaşabilirsiniz. Sosyal medyada bizi Yalansavar kullanıcı adıyla Twitter'dan ve Facebook sayfamızdan takip edebilir. Farklı konularda hazırladığımız video ve görüntülü sohbetleri ise Yalansavar'ın YouTube kanalından izleyebilirsiniz. Bizimle iletişim kurmak isterseniz lütfen yalansavar@gmail.com adresinden bize e-posta gönderin. Bir sonraki bölümde görüşmek dileğiyle sağlıcakla kalın.
And now, a reading from the Book of Tim with Tim Mendham.
Hi, my name is Tim Mendham. I'm the Executive Officer for Australian Skeptics Inc. and editor of our wonderful magazine, The Skeptic. And today I'll be reading from The Skeptic, December 2015, which is volume 35, number 4. I'm taking this from a regular column called Them, which looks at publications, magazines, websites, a lot of which are really sort of out there. It's a bit of a review page looking at these things, and some of the things are very strange. And as always in the paranormal world, there have always been some claims and claimants that have been, how should we put it, weird. We're not talking unsubstantiated here like homeopathy or dubious such as Nessie. No, we're talking about those organisations that are so far out there that they're fun. And you wonder if those who run the organisations are equally having fun. Are they joking or are they serious? So it is with the flat earthers. First of all, we have to say that they exist and they walk among us. We know, we have the proof. They have websites. And I should add that this column was written well before the current resurgence of flat earthers. Prime amongst the flat earthers, of course, is the Flat Earth Society, www.theflatearthsociety.org. This group has as its mission to promote and initiate discussion of flat earth theory as well as archive flat earth literature. Our forums act as a venue to encourage free thinking and debate. The site readily points out in its FAQs that this site is not a joke. We are actively promoting the flat earth movement worldwide. There are, admittedly, several non-serious flat earth posters, but they are fairly easy to identify. As nicely elaborated in the history section of the site, the Flat Earth Society dates back to the early 1800s, when it was founded by Samuel Burley Rowbotham, an English inventor. Rowbotham's flat earth views were based largely on literal interpretation of Bible passages. His system, called zetetic astronomy, held that the Earth is a flat disk centred at the North Pole and bounded along its southern edge by a wall of ice, with the Sun, Moon, planets and stars only a few hundred miles above the surface of the Earth. After Rowbotham's death in 1884, followers of his zetetic astronomy founded the Universal Zetetic Society, not to be confused with the Skeptical Inquirer's earliest incarnations, which was called the Zetetic. The flat earth theory developed further in the US, but it gradually faded in popular interest. However, salvation was on the way by Samuel Shenton, a Fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society and the Royal Geographic Society, who founded the International Flat Earth Society in 1956. It's also referred to as the International Flat Earth Research Society. Shenton died in 1971, and his successor, Charles Johnson, quote, actively and charismatically promoted the society. Its membership increased to over 3,000. Unfortunately, in 1995, Johnson's home was destroyed in a fire, along with all of the Society's library, archives and membership lists. He vowed to rebuild the Society, but he died in 2001, leaving the Society's future uncertain. But do not fear. The Society was resurrected in 2004 and remains active today. In 2009, it officially reopened to new members. The website, and don't forget this is from a column which is devoted to reviewing websites, the website is professionally designed with a great gallery of maps, illustrations and an extensive collection of Shenton's lecture posters, a must-read if only for cultural reasons, as well as copies of pamphlets and articles, and a wiki with lots of links to articles and videos that promote the Society's views. Sadly, the Society's last newsletter seems to have been in 1994, though it did feature the headline, Australia Not Down Under. It's well worth a read, the site, at least until the sun rises over the wall of ice at the edge of the earth. And that's from The Skeptic, December 2015, the regular column called Them. And you can read this issue and others, in fact 39 years worth of The Skeptic, from our website skeptics.com.au. You'll enjoy it, I'm sure, and then you'll rush off to subscribe to the magazine.
Hola, les habla Paula desde la hermosa ciudad de Buenos Aires, en Argentina. Cuando escuchamos podcasts, escuchamos los mismos que escucha todo el mundo, como The Skeptic Zone. Ojalá puedan venir a visitarnos algún día. Los esperamos con nuestras riquísimas comidas locales y hasta podemos ir a bailar un tango. Mientras tanto, sigan disfrutando de su dosis semanal de ciencia y pensamiento racional. ¡Chao!
Now, once again, it's time to look into the pages of Australia's periodicals, journals, magazines, gazettes. Gazettes? They still make gazettes? Dating back to the, I think almost to the 1700s, certainly to the 1800s, at Trove, trove.nla.gov.au, National Library of Australia. And in past weeks, we've been looking for yowies and ghosts and Ouija boards and things like that. And this week, I thought I'd look up the term quackery. And as you can imagine, that returns many results over the decades and decades. And there are so many pages, but let's just take a few at random here. Alright, so we land in the year 1916, the Mercury, Hobart in Tasmania. And on Wednesday the 12th of April of that year, 1916, we read in what appears to be the letters column, quackery. I wonder how much longer the public are going to tolerate fortune teller quacks and metaphysical cure-alls practicing in our midst. There is one lady who calls herself a metaphysician who makes quite large sums at the game. She says she makes no charge, but I know for a fact she does. And the poor individuals who go to her generally become such metaphysical wrecks that they sometimes end up by dying or having to go to a doctor only to find out, when it is too late, that they were incurable. If a bookmaker is caught betting, it is called illegal, and he is promptly had up and fined heavily. But these quack humbugs can go on forever, it seems, and no notice taken of them. They are not allowed to practice in other states, so why should they be allowed here? Signed, Anti-Quack. It's amazing how little has changed since the year 1916. Now the next place our search brings us to, or the next year, is 1934. The Advertiser in Adelaide on Monday the 9th of April. Dealing with quackery by a medical correspondent. The question of the quack is common to all countries, and recently it was discussed at the Royal Society of Medicine by a distinguished gathering, which included the Secretary of the International Medical Congress. Various suggestions to deal with the problem were discussed, not the least interesting being that of the well-known doctor who said that no attempt should be made on the part of the qualified profession to put down the quack by law, for he believed that it was better that people should be allowed to act foolishly than driven to act wisely. Moreover, he added, any attempt to put down unqualified practice on the part of the profession is at once ascribed to a desire to force people into its own consulting rooms. What was urgently needed, he added, was that citizens should have no possibility of mistaking those who had not been medically trained from those who had. After that distinction was clearly established, then people, having their eyes opened, should be allowed to choose between the two. The International Secretary said that though the present generation was more learned than its predecessor, it was not more sensible, and superstition was deeply ingrained. Even women of standing and culture believed in the healing properties of an East Indian amulet as a cure for rheumatism. An East Indian amulet, that's interesting. Now let's set our time machine dials to the year 1890. The Australian Star, which apparently was a newspaper here in Sydney, Australia, and a report from the 28th of August. Quackery. In no country of the world is quackery so prevalent as in Australia. You cannot pick up a single daily or periodical, but the first thing that strikes the eyes is consult free, doctor this, professor that, or Herr the other. Did it ever strike you, reader, that if a medical man has any skill whatever, there is no necessity for him to advertise at all? His pure merit alone is sure to bring him more work than he can do. Is it not so? When you are sick, you hardly know where to turn for relief, but we can direct you. Go to your nearest chemist or shopkeeper and ask for Clement's tonic. No physician can prescribe you half so good a remedy. It cannot be made in small quantities, and when you consult a physician and take his prescription to your chemist, you have to take your chance of getting fresh or stale drugs, as it happens, whatever may be in stock at the time. Whereas, in Clement's tonic, you get material which is especially prepared for its manufacture. As to the worth of Clement's tonic, no medicine in the world ever did half the good in double the time. No physician, qualified or unqualified, can prescribe half so good a remedy. Clement's tonic is praised and eulogized by all who take it, and we are receiving letters like the following every day. 52 Gowrie Street, Newtown. Dear Sir, I feel it my duty to inform you that I have been a great sufferer from neuralgia and loss of appetite. I tried lots of different things, but they proved no good. I was recommended Clement's tonic. I feel better after taking 3 doses, and after 3 days I was quite recovered, free from all pain, and appetite returned, and I feel it my duty to publish this, so that all may derive the same benefit as I have. Yours faithfully, A. kitchen. We can produce scores of similar letters, and our sole object in bringing our remedy forward is for your benefit and to keep the unwary out of the hands of advertising quacks who only want their money. Any further particulars on application to F.M. Clements, Newtown, New South Wales. Now, it's interesting that a search for the words Clements Tonic returns something called Clements Tonic Liquid, 500 millilitres, the recovery tonic for athletes after illness and the 50 plus. And it contains lots of different herbs and vitamins and things like that. I wonder if it's the same thing or a variation or just something of a similar name. Now, the next search comes up from the year 1891, Thursday the 17th of September. The newspaper is the Mercury and Weekly Courier from the state of Victoria, and this is very hard to read due to the age of the original newspaper and the scan, but I'll do my best. Let's see. Quackery. The world is full of quacks and quackery. Amongst them, all quack medicines and remedies of different kinds occupy a prominent place. We honestly believe that if cold water, pure and simple, were to be bottled and well advertised, that it could be sold in great quantities at quite a profit, and testimonials in great numbers would roll in, declaring said medicine had snatched some poor mortal from the very jaws of death. The world is full of cancer cures, consumptive cures, and yet it is doubtful as to whether either of these diseases has ever been affected in the least by medicine. Consumption will get well itself sometimes. That is, if the patient don't kill himself taking medicine before he has had the chance to get well. And indeed, it is thought by some that cancer will cure itself or become dormant, and the patient may live to a good age and die of something else. In fact, we were told by one of the highest medical authorities in the world that this is sometimes the case. We imagine, however, that the poor sufferer would not have much of a chance if we were to try a remedy that we saw the other day, composed of sulfur, quicksilver, cream of tartare, saltpeter, and molasses, with an outward appearance of reddish oil and red precipitate. Imagine a man taking into his stomach a dose like this would make, thus outraging his entire system and violating not only the laws of nature, but the simplest laws of common sense. If a dose like this would not kill a man, it strikes us that he would give cancer or any other disease a rather tough tussle. It is our candid conviction that there are but a few genuine remedies for real human ills, and that these few remedies are to be mostly found in the simple things around us, which, as a rule, we despise. You tell a man, for instance, that in hot water he will find a remedy or relief for many of the ills of life, and I'm sorry the next word is too blurred to read, and like something he will turn from it in disgust. The very fact that it is free to all, without money, without price, makes it seem of no value, and people will go on dosing themselves with doubtful drugs. Well, that's a very odd sort of report all the way back from September the 17th, 1891. So I think we'll do one more, and this time we find ourselves in the year 1873. The Armadale Express and New England General Advertiser on the 22nd of November, 1873. Quackery. As a hit at the numerous quack doctors in the United States, the American agriculturalist gives the following recipe for getting rich. Get from the medical dispensaries or elsewhere any simple stimulating compound or tonic. Take a cheap whiskey and colour it, adding any cheap stuff to give it a medical taste. Adopt any name you choose. The more nonsensical or mysterious the better. One having an Indian or Japanese or Turkish sound will be all the better. Employ the glass blower or printer or both to get up fanciful bottles or boxes or labels. Look out that the packages, contents included, don't cost over 5 or 8 cents. Assume for yourself a name as near to that of some noted physician as you dare go, and add to the end of it MD, FRS, DMD, etc. Write a long story about your great age, experience, and great successes abroad. Invent 50 to 100 or 1,000 wonderful cures wrought by your medicines, giving names in full, with residences, dates, etc. But be careful not to blunder into giving any real name of any person living in the same place. These matters arranged, advertise your medicines largely. Print and scatter circulars, pamphlets, and pictures by the ton. Result, you will reach a multitude of weak, nervous, ignorant people who are slightly ailing, or think they are. They will take your stimulating or tonic preparations and feel better right away. They will believe they have escaped or have been cured from some terrible disease, the symptoms of which you should take good care to set forth vividly in your circulars. Henceforth, you have not only a regular customer, but one who will sign your certificates of cure as strong as you can write them, and who will talk up the wonderful virtues of your medicines to others. And that wonderful bit of advice was printed in the Armidale Express and New England Advertiser, dated the 22nd of November, 1873. Well, there we are. Another interesting trip through the pages of gazettes, weeklies, periodicals, magazines, publications in Australian history. And you can enjoy such an interesting trip yourself by visiting trove.nla.gov.au.
Hallo aan alle Nederlandse luisteraars. Op dit moment bent u aan het luisteren naar de Skeptic Zone voor wetenschap en kritisch nadenken. Voor meer informatie ga naar www.skepticzone.tv.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast this week. And thank you to those people who continue to support the Skeptic Zone at Patreon or PayPal. This year, more than ever, the Skeptic Zone needs your support. Even if you decide to chip in for $5 a month, only $5 a month, it will go a long way here at the Skeptic Zone. In fact, it won't be too much longer where I will actually need to buy a little bit of new equipment because some of the devices I've been using to do the show are starting to feel their age a little bit. And those Skeptic Zone cats insist on being fed every day, so, there are bills to pay. It's less than 2 weeks to go now until Skepticon 2020, the Australian Skeptics National Convention. Really looking forward to that. What a lineup of international and local speakers we have for you. Well, I should say the good folks at the Gold Coast Skeptics who are hosting the convention this year, and they've put a lot of time and effort into lining up lots of guests and the technical part, making sure this is all going to work online when you tune in, so to speak. So you can enjoy this convention no matter where you are around the world. Skepticon 2020, head to skepticon.org.au. You still have 2 weeks left to get your tickets. Sit back in the comfort of your own home and enjoy the wonderful talks over the weekend. And that's the 23rd to the 25th of this month. Coming up on next week's show, Part 3. Part 3 of the interview with Brian Deer from Heidi Robinson, and that'll be the final part of that series. More logical fallacies with Michelle Bickersma. Michelle will be looking at weasel words. Another reading from the Book of Tim. And also, we'll be diving into Trove once more and looking for references to ESP, a term you don't hear much anymore. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics or any other skeptical organisation. Hello to the afterthoughts, the people who listen after the music for the dice game. This is where we roll a die of varying sizes or values. This week it's a D6, a good old D6, the classic die. Well, this one I picked up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's got aliens on it, spaceships and aliens. I'm going to roll this 3 times, and you use your predicting power. Where's my Skeptic Zone pen to write these down? To predict the number. Here I go. I'm going to roll it once now. Well, the first time I mean. Are you predicting? Are you guessing? Are you looking into the future? Are your spirit guides telling you something? Here we go. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It's a number 4. I think I have to get a new Skeptic Zone chair. This one's so creaky. Anyway, number 4. Next one coming is, here we go. Rolling it now. Number 1. Number 1. Yes, I know, Susan. I know. Susan Gerbeck always guesses 5. I'll see what I can do for you. Here it comes. Oh, Susan! It's a 4. So, hang on. There's a plane coming over. Good thing this is the part of the show where I don't care if planes come over, because they've been coming over for ages this morning. So, if you remember right at the top of the show, I was commenting that this show is number 626. On the 11th, which is another double number, 20, which is double number. And there you are. The roll of the dice at the end of the show has a 4, 1, and a 4. So 2 4s. Is this a foretelling of something? I wonder.